Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. Since I have been operating this channel as a booktube channel, I have been on occasion posting a recent reads video which tells of the most recent 3 or sometimes 4 books which I have finished reading. There is a playlist of all of my recent reads videos, so everything I've read going back about 3 years, I'm guessing, is talked about briefly. I do not give reviews. I sometimes go off on tangents and so forth. This year I have been in the midst of a Read Early China project. So I'm reading original works from the early period, and I have also been reading about early China. It started as a rather small project, just trying to make it through certain things that I had on my shelf, but it expanded and I wound up acquiring more books, including this lovely set of books from the University of Washington Press, which I think are about the standard when it comes to bilingual editions of works in Chinese. So in my last recent reads video, I talked about the Zuo tradition or Zuozhuan or something like that. You have to excuse my pronunciation of the Chinese. Back in the day, I was a vehement adherent to the Wade-Giles transcription system. I have not changed overly, but I have grown with all of this reading that I'm doing. I have grown so much more familiar with the pinyin, and I have come to the conclusion that I don't like either Wade-Giles or pinyin very much. Part of the problem is I tend to pronounce the words as they would appear to be were the vowels and consonants reproducing an English word. So, but because I'm speaking in English, it's hard to break from that habit. And besides, even if my Mandarin Chinese were secure, well, the Mandarin isn't even necessarily relevant, but it isn't that secure, and I wouldn't know how to say things necessarily. A needless digression here, but last recent reads video, I did talk about this book, and I remarked that it struck me as setting the standard for this type of bilingual edition. And I liked it so much, I went out and bought everything else that University of Washington Press has in this edition. This one at the end, which looks like the biggest but is actually much smaller than this one. But this was the only one that I got a deal on, so you can imagine this was not cheap, but for early China, the Zuo tradition is a book that you probably must have and must read and must be somewhat familiar with. At least the spring and autumn annals, which it comments upon. That said, I don't want you to make the same sort of mistake that I did. For this recent reads video, I'm going to cover the great commentary on the Documents Classic, the Shuoyuan, or he translates it as Garden of Eloquence, and then Fayan, or Exemplary Figures, I think is how the translation is. And I would say that the Documents Classic and the Fayan are not so critical. Unless one really wants to go in deep into the literature of the period, one can safely pass them. I bought them because as I enter into the realm of early China, I don't really know what's what. I have picked out titles based upon things that I have read about in books by Mark Edward Lewis. This one, the Zuo tradition, was coming across so frequently, I figured, well, I'd better see what it's about, and I'm glad that I did. Any of these books, a reasonable public library would have in their collection, at least a public library of the stature of Chicago's, and if not in its own collection, say you were in some smaller locality, it should be easily accessible through interlibrary loan and that sort of thing. But with the exorbitant prices for books nowadays, that is not the case. Major ancient Chinese classics should be available to a U.S. Audience, I should think. So let me go through them one by one. I've talked about all of them, I think, well, except this one, a little bit. And I'll be brief if I can. So the Documents Classic is a commentary upon this book, which is translated here as the most venerable book. A lot of the Chinese classics exist with an original, very old core, and then folks have written various commentaries upon the books, and these commentaries are of interest of themselves. So the Zuo tradition is a commentary based upon a work titled The Spring and Autumn Annals. And there exist several commentaries upon it. This is the one that is most frequently cited, and it was the one I opted to read. The Spring and Autumn Annals as a literary work is perhaps not so much of interest, but the commentary very much so is. So when it comes to the Documents Classic, that situation is reversed. And oftentimes, a lot of these commentaries, and I'm not just speaking of Chinese, some of the old Indian and whatnot, meaning Hindu, I guess you would say, classics. When you get one of these editions with the commentaries, the sentence will say, he walked into the room, and then the commentary will have a sentence that says, here so-and-so says he entered the room, something like that. And so oftentimes these commentaries are not all that interesting. And I certainly found that to be the case for the commentary on the most venerable book, as it were, or the Documents Classic. And part of the reason for that is the Documents Classic, which is commented upon, is not this book. It contains parts of this book, but it was written at a time when all of the literature was in flux. Things were being added to, things were dropping out, going missing, and so forth. So the commentary does not have exact correspondences with this book. The nice thing about this is it is set up so that you can read the Spring and Autumn Classic, and then it is followed immediately by the relevant commentary. With this book or this commentary, no such thing is possible, and it really takes the reader much deeper into the weeds than I think anybody needs, as far as textual criticism, transmission, textual variance, and so forth. Perhaps in the future, I don't discount the possibility of reading any of this stuff. The more you know, the more everything else becomes of interest, I should say. So that was the first book in this set for this Recent Reads video. The second book was a surprise, and it is the Shuoyuan, or what did I say, the Garden of Eloquence. Let me just show you the book. it is a huge book. It's, I think I said 1,241 pages, plus aftermatter, plus an introduction. The introduction is not too, 1,241, not too in-depth, but it tells you everything you need. This is translated by Eric Henry, and having read now a good, more than a handful of collections or compendiums of early Chinese stories, vignettes, anecdotes, materials, etc. I unexpectedly have come to esteem this one, Garden of Eloquence, very much. There's not a clunker in the book, or hardly a clunker in the book. Last time I said, I think at the beginning of chapter 18, there's a little bit of talk pertaining to, now I can't remember what it was, astronomy and that kind of thing, yin-yang theory. In some of the works that antedate this, that sort of material can be somewhat grueling to get through, especially if you're not really interested in learning all the fine points of these ancient attempts to map ideas onto the world, which is how I view them now when I look at something such as the 5 elements or the 5 phases. I don't look at it now as saying, this is an explanation of how the world works. I see it now more as, this is an attempt to figure out a possible schema for the world and why things happen as they do. So, a lot of good stories. Any of these Chinese works have a lot of duplication. So, stories that you find in one, you will find elsewhere. I recently read the Huainanzi. That's also covered in the last Recent Reads video. If I didn't mention, I will link the playlist in the description box. But in one section to the introduction, or one of the chapter introductions, comparisons were made with 3 different versions of a story in terms of how each different text presented that particular story. And one of the texts was from the Garden of Eloquence, and there were a couple of others. And I would not say that my favorite in that 3-way comparison was from the Garden of Eloquence, but when it came time to read the book itself, that comparison was forgotten, and I liked everything that was in the book. If you only read one book from early China, you get a lot of the major stories here. Eric Henry points out that he does not believe you can take it as history. There are anachronisms and so forth throughout the text, but honestly, this, which is much more historical in purview, I guess you would say, even this, one must take everything with a grain of salt when it comes to this early Chinese literature. So figures will be discussing events which happened, say, 200 years after they were upon the scene in whatever state they were in, and so forth. But as far as good material to familiarize yourself with sort of the mindset, sort of the ecology, I guess I want to say, of literature of the early Chinese period, this is really a good volume. And as I say, it has a lot of stuff and not a lot of dross. So, I mean, other than that, I was thinking, well, it's not really pertinent to anything, is it? But as I say, the enjoyment factor, the pleasure factor of the book overrode any of those concerns as I got into the book. So I did not expect to finish these 3 as fast. This I plowed through because I really didn't like it. This I went through fairly fast just because I was enjoying it so much, and it was pretty much an easy read. And then this, again, it reverted to what I said about the first. I pushed myself through it because I really did not like it so much. So this is Fayan, or Exemplary Figures, translated by Michael Nylan. And she has a book that I want to read dealing with the topic of pleasure in early China. The notes are off-cited to the publisher's website, which I dislike. But this volume does not give me a lot of encouragement to buy the book. I should say I disliked the book quite a lot. I think some of that is because I did not like the translation, but I think some of that is because I did not like Yang Xiong, who wrote the book. So I thought I would go through some of the stuff and just give you my persnickety little complaints. But it's not something that I would recommend as a necessary text of the period, even if you were trying to be a little bit more expansive than simply one book. Now these I present in roughly chronological order. The textual problems in this first book have there's so much incongruity and perplexity that the introduction is super long, and if you're interested in how texts move through time, it's worthwhile reading. I liked that better than the book itself, but I have a tendency to like how texts move through time, studying about that. So this one, as I said, the introduction was not so big. This one is in between as far as the introduction, and I really had no qualms with the introduction. So let me see. I only towards the end decided to start noting some of the things that bugged me. Now I'm not finding it. Oh, here it is. Let me just read you a little of this. The story of this guy was he worked in the Imperial Library, but during a segment of time, I think he had to bury a son or a couple of sons, and so he traveled to Shanghai, it might have been. He traveled away from the imperial capital. And while he was there, because he was a reputable and recognizable man of letters, lots of scholars and would-be scholars from all over the place had questions to ask him. And so this essentially recounts the questions he was asked and then the answers that he gave. So the format itself I have no reason to dispute that is how the text came about, but the format itself may be what has caused me to think of Yang Xiong as something of an insufferable pedant. So let's just read a little bit. The whole world praises Dongfan Shuo's preeminence, but his speech was no pure model, and his conduct no pure standard. The fashions he set, like the writings he left behind, are nothing special. So the translator, Michael Nylan, footnotes that, and at the bottom you get, instead of are nothing special, literally did not amount to much. And this problem crops up frequently in the text. I find that the literal translation works best. It did not amount to much. Why not just go with the literal translation instead of saying what did she write here? Are nothing special. That's a little bit too colloquial, vernacular, and really misleading, I think. So the next one was page 203. These books are not as big as you would think because the Chinese is on one side of the page, the English is on the other, and there are footnotes at the bottom, and generally sometimes there's a lot of white space in between, sometimes not so much. What I say, 203? Oh, here again. An undeserved reputation is the bane of humaneness. And she footnotes that. Literally, is the thief of, meaning that it steals or prevents something. Zhe also implies violence in Han law, which is germane here. So an undeserved reputation is the bane of humaneness. Why not simply translate it as an undeserved reputation is the thief of humaneness? That really gets you more into the feel of the Chinese, I would vouch. Not that I really know. Who am I to correct Michael Nylan? But I'm just approaching it as a reader. Next, 207. Oh, this was a really odd one. Chapter of the Nobleman. The book, each chapter, there are 13 chapters, begins with some verses or a little bit of poetry. So they are divided by that long dotted line. And she gives the verse summary. The nobleman who remains pure to the end earns a fine reputation. Malefactors wreaking havoc, he constrains at every point, developing the models of the sages. It's really odd that she goes with an ungrammatical phrasing there. He constrains. Malefactors wreaking havoc, he constrains. I have not dug into the Chinese to see what that says. She does mention in a note that it's a difficult passage to translate, but I don't see that a translation is helped at all by intentionally introducing a English grammatic mistake. Does it mean malefactors wreaking havoc? He constrains them. Malefactors wreaking havoc. Them, he constrains. I mean, none of those seem all that good, but malefactors wreaking havoc, he constrains. Very, very confusing. Could just be a typo. Oddly enough, I found more typos in this one than is usual for a University of Washington press. In this case, I just let them go. There are an awful lot of them, however. But it didn't bother me. The book itself was so wonderful. And this is another oddity, and I'll just read you a little bit to get into it first. Starting with him talking about the question and then the start of his answer, I will give you. Someone asked me if the way of the sages is like heaven, and heaven has its regular, constant laws, then why do the sages undergo so many transformations? The sages do indeed undergo many changes. Ziyou and Zixia certainly got the master's writings, but they never truly apprehended his reasons for writing. This is the first in all of the books that I've read which suggests that Confucius wrote down all of his stuff. I have no doubts that Confucius was a literate man, but my understanding with the transmission of these texts is that they came down to us and were perhaps written by disciples and so forth. And this is not the only instance. There was an earlier case which was, I think, even a little bit more blatant than that. This you might be able to argue, well, the master's writings, they mean writings about what the master said, that kind of thing. But that second part of the sentence, they never truly apprehended his reasons for writing. And there's no real explanation about this. And so I found that sometimes the notes are just, they do not give you enough information. So there was a case of, he compares the records of the great historian with this book, and there's a footnote. This is the second time he makes a comparison between the records of the historian and the Zhou tradition. But then there's no indication of where in the text you can find it. And any of these other books which I have read would give you that detail so that you can find it. Now maybe if you go to the index, you can kind of use a little detective work and figure it out. But if you're going to tell us that it's the second time, then why not point a finger to the first? So the notes are sloppier in this than expected. Now, was I going to say something more about this, or am I here? Oh, yeah, his reasons for writing. It is footnoted, and what does it say? Or more generally, why the sages wrote. It's an odd feature of this translation that very often she second guesses herself, and so in the footnote she will say it could be read this way as well. I appreciate more information, to be sure, but I found it really distracting all the time to go down and find a different version of the translation by the translator. It almost suggests a want of self-confidence in the translator. Another interesting thing which happened frequently was she will mention from often, I think, private correspondence, what another one of her colleagues suggested would be the better translation. So she says as much, referring to, I think it's Michael Plaks, Plaks, who has translated some of the things I've read, and another one as well. I can't remember. Christoph Harbsmeyer, who translated the Han Fates, which I read earlier on in this project. Not in every case have I preferred the suggested rendering by her colleague, but I would say in 3 out of 4 instances I preferred the rendering proposed by her colleague. So let's go on. As I say, this is persnickety, possibly possibly if I were to approach this again in the future with more knowledge, my feelings would be better than they are. This has nothing to do with the translation, really. People must first do something before others grant them a good name. They must first seek something before others will give it to them. People must love themselves before others will love them. They must have self-respect before others will respect them. To love oneself is the ultimate expression of humaneness, just as self-respect is the ultimate expression of ritual decorum. There has never been a person who failed to love and respect himself who was loved and respected by others. Somewhat trite, well enough said, I guess, but to me it screamed pedantry, it screamed a bit of regurgitation, it screamed a bit of parroting. Michael Nylan suggests that he proposed himself as a modern day Confucius, so to speak, that he considered himself to be an equivalent sage, on par with Confucius, a sage for his own time. And I did not really read such a claim in the text. Doubtless, a lot of scholars have raised that feeling. But even so, one does have the sense of, in all of these books, there's a lot of duplication, repeats. You don't know, this material was floating around, somebody heard it from somebody else, but it never carries with it the sense of just parroting, which, as I say in this book, you get that sense. When I was young and in Taiwan learning the first bit that I did about China, I remember in one of the traveler's hostel, some guy said to me, and I don't remember the quote exactly, but it's very interesting. He said, different places, and I think he was talking about Japan, criticized because they're just imitations, or they began as just imitations of China and so forth. That's the part of the quote that I don't remember, but then he said, China, as it developed, just became an imitation of itself. And that always really struck me. I have never, ever seen evidence to that. I've never felt that sentiment. Not that I have studied that much, but when I read this book, I thought, oh, that could be. You get the sense that he is merely imitating his forebears. Getting close to the end. This one, I don't even know what I was looking for here. All I could guess was maybe it's the last sentence, which I thought was pretty good. You're going to say, well, it sounds kind of like the last one. Why do you think this is kind of good? I don't know. The noble man is loyal to others, and all the more so to himself. The petty man deceives himself, and all the more so others. I could see, maybe that's why I flagged this page. I don't know. It seemed pretty good. The book is not without value, to be sure. And then I think the last one was just more of the same. Oh yeah. So this takes you back sort of to where I was with the first persnickety quibble with the translation. The very best situation is one where the sage ruler's charismatic virtue is so fabled as to elicit the admiration of all the faraway peoples. if the word fabled gets a footnote, literally great. I use fabled since this reduplicative describes what is deep, far away, remote, wide-ranging, or huge. The word fabled really seems, again, misleading, as I said earlier. Let me read that again with the word great. The very best situation is one where the sage ruler's charismatic virtue is so great as to elicit the admiration of all the faraway peoples. That sounds Chinese to me, more so than fabled. But if you're going to do a deep dive, these are all beautiful editions from the University of Washington Press. And I brought this one out just to show you. This is, despite the size, I said this was 1241. This is, and I'm not counting the back matter, I'm just counting the text. This is 697. This is not from my period. This is reputed to be the world's first book of historiography. So it does not fall within the period I am reading, but I am a lover of historiography. So the first book of historiography would be right up my alley. Maybe I will get to it, maybe not. It's something I would like to read at some point. So all that remains is to let you know what I have moved on to, and that is the Intrigues of the Warring States, I think is how it is sometimes translated. Here I have in the Wade Giles transliteration the Chan-Kuo, or the Chan-Kuo, that would be Guo, I know, but I'm not sure. I'm not really sure how it goes, but when I read this book and when I finished it, I thought, well, this covers the spring and autumn period, which is sort of the first part of the Zhou dynasty. The second part of the Zhou dynasty, I think, no, I could be, well, there's a western and an eastern, and now I can't remember what is what. But I thought, well, there has to be something akin to this that covers the period of the Warring States. And so I researched it and found out indeed there was this title. And finding this copy was kind of difficult. I had it shipped from England, and when it came, it smelled incredibly foully. That's always a worry when you buy a book from the UK. But it's in beautiful shape. You can see it. It looks like it's scarcely been read. And I believe that foul smell largely was from the bookstore itself. So it's been sitting out for at least a month, and much of that has dissipated. There's still a little bit of faint odor to it, but translated by J.I. Crump. Haven't really heard anything about this book, but I've finished the introduction, and it sounds quite interesting. He suggests as well that it should not be taken as history, although the ancient Chinese certainly took it as history, and it is, I'm sure, very much the basis for much historical rumination. But he suggests possibly that it was rhetorical exercises which used the materials from the Warring States as their topic. So we'll see. I have not touched the text as yet. This is how things stand with me. And I'm not quite sure what books I will read after this. But when I finish 2 or 3 more after this, I will return with another recent reads video. So I hope that you have enjoyed hearing about my reading. I am dwindling my channel viewership down to almost nothing, I think. I don't really understand why early China is not of more general interest than it is. Fortunately, I had an early introduction to thinking about China and have spent a good deal of my life with China never all that far removed from my mind. So I am enjoying it greatly. As I say, if you only want to read one book, The Garden of Eloquence or Shuoyuan would be a marvelous place if you just want some entertaining stories that give you a real good sense of the times. These are all from during the Han, and I think even this was compiled during the Han, but referring back to the Warring States period. It's really hard to make sense of all the jumble. The history of China is so vast, and I am spending a year just on the very earliest period. The periods generally that you find covered by the historian Mark Edward Lewis, who I mentioned. I've picked up these things not knowing what they are. This is most definitely a book that one should start with if you really want to get to know the history of China somewhat. But I would not. I would not denigrate any of the books by Mark Edward Lewis either, although they are intended for an academic audience. I think they have always been above my head, but little by little I have been chipping away at it. So I will catch you all on the next one.